Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Brooke Hudson. Welcome to Omaha Fashion Week, the virtual edition. I think we've still got a few people coming in from the waiting room right now, but I just want to take a minute to say hello. Thank you for tuning in. We're super excited about our presentation this morning. We have two fashion greats here with us today, two people that I'm so excited to get together and hear what they have to say. One of them is Marylou Luther, and she is from Cambridge, Nebraska, a small town of 1,200, and has had a 70-year career covering the fashion industry. So we're calling this presentation In the Room, and she was literally in the room when so many iconic moments in fashion happened. A lot of the things that we take for granted that are in our closets today, everything from jeans to mini skirts, were things that were groundbreaking decades past that Marylou was present for and covered as a fashion journalist. So she's going to be giving us a 20-minute presentation on her 10 favorite moments in fashion. And then we also are very fortunate to have with us Mary Ann Baccaro, who is an Omaha fashion designer who's been designing and illustrating fashion for decades as well. And Mary Ann is a good friend. I've known her for 20 years now. She's done some dresses for me when I competed in the Miss America pageant, and has been a great mentor as I've spent almost 11 years doing Omaha Fashion Week. She's kind of been there encouraging along the way. So Mary Ann is going to be asking some probing questions of Marylou, and then of course we will be opening it up to the audience to ask their questions as well. And the best way to submit your questions is to just drop them in the chat, or once the presentation that Marylou is doing is complete, you could also just open up your camera and ask the question that way, whichever way you feel most comfortable. With that, I will turn it over to Marylou Luther. Thank you for being here.
On my screen right now, it says this meeting is being recorded by the host or a participant. Do I hit something to get rid of it?
Oh, yep, just hit the got it button.
Got it, okay.
Yep. And we are recording this so that we can share this after the presentation is over with more audiences.
Okay, so am I on?
You are on. It's all yours.
Okay, my first top fashion moment was in 1953 when Frank Irely, the managing editor of the Des Moines Register, told me that I was going to be the new fashion editor. I had been at the paper about 6 weeks. When I told him I couldn't, that I didn't know a thing about fashion, he said, "You'll learn." My first lesson, going over photos of the Paris haute couture collections with the about to retire fashion editor, Peggy Hippie, the niece of legendary Harper's Bazaar editor, Carmel Snow. She would show, it was Paris haute couture week, and she would show me a design by Jacques Fat, and I would think for a second, because I thought his name, oh, she's talking about Jacques Fat. That's how dumb I was. Then she showed me Dior's tulip silhouette, and I literally tiptoed through the tulips, pretending that what I saw, but never for an instant understanding the connection between the dress and the flower. About 2 months later, I told Mr. Irely I would have to resign because fashion was totally over my head. And I knew that every one of the 525,000 people who saw, that was the circulation of the paper, who saw the sign every morning when I came to work. I know that all of those people knew that I had no idea what I was talking about. He would not accept my resignation, told me to go back to my desk, and that if I wanted to say something again in 3 months, he said, quote, "We will talk." A month after my, I don't know what the word is here, after my attempted resignation, he sent me to New York to cover what was known as public relations Queen Eleanor Lambert's Fashion Week, held twice yearly at the Pierre Hotel. And that was really the beginning of my fashion education. Sitting in the hotel's ballroom with a table lavish with snacks and coffee, watching the clothes of Lambert's designer customers, clients go by. Now, flash to 1957 and the Chicago Tribune. I was at a press preview cocktail party given by Marshall Field in celebration of the 10th anniversary of Christian Dior's New Look, 1947. My boss, the inimitable Eleanor Nangle, knowing that there would be a 5 p.m. press conference and a 10 a.m. fashion show the next morning, decided that we should stay all night at a nearby hotel. But before that, and more of that in a minute, Monsieur Dior was amazing, approachable, ever smiling, totally charming, eager to answer questions about the latest rendition of the bar suit that made him a legend. Now, exit Marshall Field and march toward the hotel room. Sharing a hotel room with your boss is not exactly comfortable. Or as today's young women might say, it's not in my job description. And especially uncomfortable for me as I spent much of the night vomiting in the bathroom. I am allergic to oysters and didn't know it then. Ugh. As Miss Nangle told me the next morning, here you are, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I'm exhausted because you kept me up all night. I wanted to die or cry. She forgave me. She liked the story I wrote about the fashion show, and all was well that ended well. Dior died a few months later, and it was announced that he would be succeeded by a 21-year-old named Yves Saint Laurent. I asked, begged really, Miss Nangle if she could convince the Tribune's executives to send me to Paris to cover Saint Laurent's first collection scheduled for January 30th, 1958. She did. She also, you'll love this one, she also called my mother in Cambridge, Nebraska, to ask if she had any objections to the fact that I would be traveling to Paris working with, quote, a young man, unquote. Photographer Carl Turk. My mother said no, she trusted me. My mother said it's fine. But she neglected to tell Miss Nangle that she knew Carl Turk, that we had worked together and danced together at the Des Moines Register, and that she had met him several times, included hostessing him in Cambridge. Okay. So your boss calls your mother. Would that happen today? I doubt it. Now click on January 1958. I'm in Paris attending Saint Laurent's first collection following the death of Dior. He called it his trapeze collection. It was a fashion moment unlike any other. The audience was friendly but wary, nervous to see if a 21-year-old, excuse me, deserved the right to succeed Dior at Dior. Not long after the first few models appeared, the verdict was in. Saint Laurent was indeed the daring young man on the flying trapeze. That's what I called him in the story I wrote. Something to the effect that he had definitely swung the audience from doubt to ecstasy. Well, almost. As I walked over to 30 Avenue Montaigne to await the young designer's appearance on the balcony of his building, of the Dior building, I was stunned by the numbers of Parisians. Could it be thousands? Thousands, I think, all waiting for their new hero. He appeared, he smiled, he waved, and he was hailed as fashion royalty. As I wrote in the closing line of my coverage, the king is dead. Long live the king. Oh, okay, that was despite the contention of a London journalist that Americans could not use those words, that they were exclusively British. I did anyway. Next is 1959, and I'm in Paris again for haute couture collections. And I call Marshall Field's celebrated fashion director, Kathleen Catlin, every night to hear her impressions of the day's collections before writing my story, ever cautious that I might misinterpret something. She interrupts to tell me she wants me to meet her at 10 a.m. the next day at the Pierre Klein studio to the same design. How it almost looked like a mini movie theater with about 5 raised rows of 10 across seats. Cardin was about to become the first couturier to introduce ready-to-wear, a ready-to-wear collection, a move that got him temporarily barred from the Chambre Syndicale. The Chambre Syndicale is the governing body of Paris fashion. Man had not yet landed on the moon. And that happened, of course, in 1969, but Cardin had. The fashion world was moonstruck by his lunar looks. Here I was with fashion's first features. God, I threw away the wrong things. Well, this is terrible. Page. Oh, thank God, I saved it.
Hey, Mary Lou.
Yes,
Mary Lou.
yes.
We can hear papers rustling against the microphone and it's obscuring your voice. Can you move the papers away from the microphone a bit?
Oh, sure. The ones that I've already talked over.
Yeah, so there was just a few moments that we missed because there were papers kind of rustling near the microphone. So, all right,
Sure.
go ahead. Thanks.
Anyway, he had minis and warrior-ready tabards and space helmets and leotards, literally agog at his, I was literally agog at his audacity, not to mention his sagacity. He shook my hand and answered my questions, and I have remained his admirer ever since. I later came to realize that he was the world's first, quote, brand name. Now, this is an amazing fact. By the end of the last century, he had accrued 900 licensees in 150 countries. No one has come close to that since then. And no one has come close to his pugnacity in remarks such as, quote, the fashion industry has been defaced by big business and nudity. And, quote, we have completely disfigured this profession that was once very creative, unquote. It's still 1959. Yes, that was an amazing year for my moments. And now I'm at Coco Chanel's Rue Cambon showroom, awaiting her post-show appearance at the top of the stairs. I should say reappearance, because she sat there through all of her openings so she could see the expression on the faces of the audience. Anyway, after I can't believe I'm here for a presentation of the epical design of her epical designs. I was fortunate enough to meet her immediately after and to marvel at her feistiness, her quick wit, and magisterial presence. It was like having an audience with the Pope. Now pretend it's 1969. Paris designer André Kuraj, another space age oracle, father of white ankle moon boots, and the first designer to hire Black models, is in Beverly Hills for a personal appearance in his own boutique. I'm interviewing him for the Los Angeles Times, and he tells me that fashion, oh yeah, I love this. Fashion always flourishes after major catastrophes, citing the the flourishing of Art Deco after the 1930s Depression, the success of Dior's new look following World War II, the youthquake of the 60s following the introduction of the pill, and the birth of androgyny in mannish jackets and pantsuits following women's liberation, AKA the feminist movement of the late 60s and 70s. I will never forget this lesson in cause and fashion effect. By Kuraj reasoning, I look forward to a burst of fashion creativity now, following the, the pandemic, massive global uprisings, wars, and terrorist attacks of our present time. Next, so far that hasn't happened, but I'm convinced that it will. The scene is now Los Angeles. The time is the 70s. The moment maker is Rudy Gernrich, who fathered so much more than the topless bathing suit. I hesitate to mention it. For me, Gernrich was the ultimate disruptor. Not only did he bare breasts and shave pubic hair, heads and bodies, he also passed out guns, created helmets that extended over the face, and dress models as nuns. He called them the Sisters of the Immaculate Mascara, all in the name of fashion. I saw him as a prophet, a seer with 2020 fashion vision, a designer who left no taboo unturned. To his detractors, he was also a prophet, the oracle of ugly. Here's my favorite quote from him, quote, "Prior to the 60s, clothes were clothes, nothing else. Then when they started coming from the street, I realized you could say things with clothes. Clothes became sociological statements. Design was not enough. I began to feel it was important to say something that is not confined to its medium." Next, until Jeffrey Bean, American fashion was widely considered as a contradiction in terms. Yes, there was Gernrich. Yes, there was Claire McCardle and Bonnie Cashin. Yes, there was Norman Norell and James Galanos. But America's contribution to the world of fashion was widely perceived to be blue jeans and t-shirts. And I don't mean to detract from them for a minute. In 1963, when Bean opened his Eponymous collection, he said his goal was to prove that American fashion could have the same international influence as American music, films, jeans, sweatshirts, and sneakers. 1 year later, he won his first of 8 Coty Awards, the most ever bestowed on an American designer. Excuse me. His reward for bringing, well, his reward for bringing gray flannel, wool jersey, and tweed into the ballroom and turning a football jersey into a sequined evening gown. In 1976, he became the first American designer to show during the collections in Milan, the first American designer to show at the American Embassy in Rome, in Paris, 1978, in Brussels, 1978, and Vienna, 1985. My favorite Bean quote, "One must assert one's individuality or it will be lost in collectivity." Some more 70s moments. Tom Wolfe called this the me decade. Hippie collectives gave way to personal style. And for me, that idea was personified by the Karl Lagerfeld of the 70s, then the Chloe designer, who wore a monocle, carried a walking stick, and wore his hair in a catogan. Of course, he wanted to be noticed, and indeed he was, especially in his gated appearances almost nightly at La Coupole, that then the watering hole of Paris fashion. Lagerfeld and Thierry Mugler are, to me, the first to make the show as important as the clothes in taking center stage as a fashion element. It used to be color, fabric, and silhouette. Now add stagecraft. Of all his magical transformations at the Grand Palais, my favorites are the Chanel supermarket, the Chanel airport, and the Chanel iceberg. He had stalactites and stalagmites brought in from, I think it was Denmark. And I've forgotten. And all starring Lagerfeld's indefatigable tweaking of the Chanel jacket, providing new twists season after season. More 70s moments. Go to Sonia Rykiel, a fashion visionary whose death left me mourning a woman who was my fashion heroine, a woman who came not from haute couture, but from ready-to-wear. As the first designer to give clothes a double life by turning them inside out, Gemini Sonia Rykiel told me that everything you've ever heard about the duality of this astrological sign is true. A Gemini woman has two sides, and she is always moving between them, she told me. So of course, she needs two-faced clothes. A Gemini woman also doubles up on her clothes, layering one on top of the other, says the woman who first made layering an act of chic. Rykiel's knits not only changed the fit of fashion from broad-shouldered tailoring to narrow shoulders, high armhole knit witcheries. They also challenged the fashion supremacy of haute couture. Enter comfort, liberation, real clothes for real women. Enter fashion shows that ended with ebullient models taking their runway turn with joyous smiles and just gesticulations. Ever the game changer, Rykiel was also the first to write on clothes, the word love appearing frequently, and the first to have models speak on the runway, telling their fashion story in words as well as deed. One especially memorable moment for me was the evening I was invited to dinner at her home, along with guests Karl Lagerfeld and Kenzo Takada, at that moment reigning Japanese designer. The conversation was mind-boggling, so mind-boggling that I can't remember a single word. The second most memorable moment was when Sonia presented me with the Chevalier Award in Paris on October 5th, 2008. Her introduction was so generous, so loving, I will of course never forget it. And as I said to her in my acceptance, quote, as they say in Hollywood, you really are the one, the only, the original Sonia Rykiel. Now enter Thierry Mugler. In his 10th anniversary, 1983, the Paris designer presented the world's first fashion show open to the public. An audience of 6,000 watched models in Muglerian ski clothes climb the make-believe mountain of chic. Thierry was also the first designer to have a superstar, Diana Ross, model on the runway, the first to have mother-daughter stars on the runway, Jerry Hall and Elizabeth Jagger, Ivana and Ivanka Trump. His joyful irreverences ranged from sending supermodel Pat Cleveland into fashion heaven as the Virgin Mary one season and banishing her to hell as the bride of Lucifer the next. He and America's Todd Oldham were the first to hire transvestite models. Sometimes I remember designers as much for what they say as for what they did. And I'm throwing in, I have written the book, it will be published this fall. And these are quotes I've collected through the years from famous designers. And each quote is illustrated by the most fantastic fashion illustrator in the world, I think, Ruben Toledo. Anyway, the quotes, some of them I read here, just a couple, but they're amazing. Okay. Now, hello, Christian Lacroix. His explosive poof skirts and decorative clothes made him famous, but it was his words that are momentous to me. In the late 1980s, I was interviewing him and closed my notebook. Yes, we still took notes in notebooks. back then. And I realized I had just had a history lesson. Here's what he taught me in his words, quote, "Until the 18th century, each period lived in its own creation. Each century created its own environment. There was no looking back until Louis XVI, that's 1754 to 1793. From the beginning of the 19th century, fashion has taken the past as inspiration. In the teens, Poiret's first famous numbers were Directoire, 1795 to 1799. The late teens were romanticized 19th century updates. Dior's new look of 1947 was an homage to his mother. The 60s relaunched the 20s. The 50s inspired my generation. This is definitely Lacroix talking here. Lesson: looking back has long been a fashion trajectory. Really, it literally a designer's pastime. The weighty 80s also involved two great talents for me, two great moments for me. The fashion director at the Dallas Apparel Mart, Kim Dawson, was a fashion group friend. When she asked me if I could get some famous designers to come to Dallas to be honored at the Mart, I told her I would try. My first success was Hubert de Givenchy. The Grand Hubert told me he'd be delighted to come to Dallas, and he did. On October the 5th, 1987, accepting the Dallas Apparel Mart's first International Achievement Award. The designer who created the Sabrina neckline, made famous by Audrey Hepburn in the movie Sabrina, and widely copied both here and in Europe. And he also brought updates of the little black dress he designed for Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. It wasn't the first LBD. That honor goes back to 1926 in Chanel. It was Givenchy's version of Audrey Hepburn that etched the LBD in our collective memory. The Dallas event was so successful, the designer told me if I had another US appearance up my sleeve, he would be more than happy to participate. But my voice is telling me to stop. But I'll keep on unless it is annoying. Is it annoying? Nobody's talking.
No, it's fascinating. Please carry on. It's fascinating.
Okay. I told him, he told me he'd be more than happy to participate, and he did. About 1 year later, October 29, 1988, for a 36-year retrospective of his work at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel in Beverly Hills. This appearance came about when my Beverly Hills neighbor, Della Koenig, asked me if I would suggest someone to honor at her favorite charity, the LA County High School of the Arts. I suggested Givenchy. He said yes. One of my favorite Givenchy stories happened in 1961. President and Mrs. Kennedy flew to Paris for the gala state dinner given by President Charles de Gaulle. It had just been announced that the First Lady would wear only American-made clothes during her Paris stay. Word leaked out, however, that Mrs. Kennedy was still buying clothes from Givenchy in Paris. Pierre Salinger, then the president's press secretary, furiously denied the report. And what did Mrs. Kennedy wear to the evening she wowed Gay Paris, including the implacable de Gaulle? When she wowed them with her perfect French, she wore a Givenchy, of course. Meanwhile, back to Dallas, I had asked Versace's PR, Emanuela Schmeidler, to see if Gianni would be interested in coming to Dallas. She said yes, he would love to. As his plane touched down in Dallas, an impressive group of screaming and yelling young men and women were waiting at the foot of the plane's the stairs to greet him. A smiling, waving Gianni assumed that, of course, he had fans in Dallas. When I asked Emanuela after the show, after the show how this greeting happened. She told me she had hired the young people to be there to make Johnny, quote, feel more impressed about his arrival. I thought that was an amazing PR way to do something. The show was a great success, but here's the backstory. I don't know that this still happens, but in those days, there were no night flights out of Dallas for New York, and it was Fashion Week in the Big Apple. So I booked the earliest possible flight the next day after the show. When I arrived breathlessly to make it to the 10 o'clock Bill Blass show, there were all the models who had been in Dallas the evening before, now all hair and makeup ready, walking the runway for Blass. How did this happen, I wondered? Answer, Versace had chartered a plane to bring them back to New York the evening before. Another example of the Italian designer's sense of bravado was the time he decided to show his collection during Paris Haute Couture Week, and at some unusual venue, the Ritz Hotel. Not just at the Ritz, but at the hotel swimming pool, which he had someone convert the runway to a runway by covering it in planks. It was a watershed moment. Lest my memory seems overly Paris-based, I would like to tell you about Halston, or Roy Halston Frowick, as he was christened. You could say that Halston was one of the first designers to make comfort a fashion condition. He once said, the two most important elements in fashion are comfort and sex. His clothes were both, but not glitzy sexy or sex object sexy, more minimalist sexy. He was also the first to lend his talent and label to a mass market retailer, JCPenney, a move many said attributed to his loss of prestige as well as his business. As I wrote of him in 1980 during his LA stopover en route to China with what he called his corps de ballet, all of the world's most famous models, plus Bianca Jagger and several staff members, all of whom, this is so amazing, all of whom would join him days later as they paraded their water repellent silk parkas and matching pants all in Chinese red on the Great Wall of China. Can you imagine that? By Friday, I wrote, quote, Halston's Hartman ultra suede luggage containing the Halston sportswear, the Halston originals, the Halston made to order clothes, the Halston furs for Ben Kahn, the Halston menswear, the Halston ties, the Halston accessories, the Halston handbags, the Halston shoes for Garlini, the Halston lingerie for Form Fit Rogers, the Halston accessories, the Halston gloves for Kaiser Roth, the Halston fragrance for Max Factor had all been unpacked. Just a few of his 28 business enterprises. Halston's niece, Leslie Frowick, wrote in the opening page of her book, Halston, his quote, "You are only as good as the people you dress." He's right. Or she was right. No, he was right. It was his quote. Okay, next, back to LA. It was the day after I'd written a Los Angeles Times article about Stan Herman's designs for Mr. Mort, an article which I described him as short, a description that gave him a conniption fit and incited him to call me to complain. Maybe scold me is more accurate. Quote, "You never describe Givenchy as tall, do you?" he asked accusingly. Truth to tell, I had written about Givenchy's 6'6" French presence. Now, I would like to set the record straight. Stan Herman is a giant force in design who led the CFDA, who is president of the CFDA, to new heights, raised more than $10 million for breast cancer research and $12 million for AIDS research, a designer who has, through his uniform licensees and his 23 years of breaking loungewear records on QVC, he has arguably dressed more women and men than any designer ever. A tall order from a tall talent. I'm trying to make up for short. Before the music starts to tell me my time is up, I have to include a few other outstanding moments. One, the time Yoli, creator of fashion as wearable art and architecture, showed her collection in a Manhattan subway using real people as models. The first reality dressing. The time Isaac Mizrahi designed a jacket with a built-in backpack, and the time he staged his show around a scrim showing the real backstage craziness as models got prepped for the show. The time I was interviewed on TV immediately following Ralph Rucci's first show and started crying in front of the TV cameras. I was so moved by his incredible artistry. I simply could not hold back the tears. Ralph told me later that my tears inspired his tears. 2 hours worth, he said, when he returned home that night. To this day, Ralph's first words to me as I come to congratulate him are, well, did you cry? My bleary, my blink, bleary, I'm gonna be all right here. I'm on to my last paragraph. My teary blink backs provide the answer. And now, before I start crying, I am happy to try to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Oh, that was awesome. Thank you so much. That was wonderful, Marylou. I have been writing, I have a list of questions, and I'm sure Marianne Vaccaro does as well. And then anybody else who has some questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And it looks like Brianna just, dropped a note in the chat about designer applications. So if we have any designer hopefuls out there, applications open March 1st to be a part of Omaha Fashion Week this upcoming August. Okay, so with that, Marianne, yeah, we have a season coming up in August and applications start March 1st. Marianne Vaccaro, do you have any questions or do you want me to start?
Well, you can start with questions, but first of all, I just want to thank you and compliment you. I'm like almost in tears listening to these stories and the wealth of information that you provided for all these people who don't have an understanding of what it is that the fashion industry is really all about, and describing the clothes, the name buildings, the designers. It's really been beautiful. I cannot wait for your book. So, question. Oh, did you hear me?
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's good.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I have to echo Marianne's thanks. I mean, you are just a wealth of knowledge, and the book, I too am very excited for that to come out. Okay, so my first question is, and this is a very simple one, but I was really struck by your first offer of resignation and your first job in, I think, was it at the Chicago Tribune or was it the Des Moines Register?
Des Moines Register. I had previously worked for both the Hastings Tribune and the Lincoln Journal. I didn't put them in one of my fashion moments because I wasn't doing fashion. In fact, my major job at the Lincoln Journal was moving my boss's car every 2 hours.
I love it. You got to start somewhere. So you offered your resignation, and your boss at the Register was like, no, you got to stick around. What do you think it was that caused your boss to say, to encourage you to stay in the job?
Well, I know he liked my writing. The Register used to have a great trip. Well, what they did was have every new employee for 6 weeks write at the copy desk, and they kept changing where you would write and learn. So at the end of those 6 weeks, one of the editors I wrote for published what I wrote on page 1 of the paper. And that impressed my boss. I know why I got the offer.
Awesome. So it looks like we have a question. Let's see. Somebody wants to know okay, here's a question. What would be your advice to new designers as we are emerging from the pandemic? And you described how great, tough times came out in terms of fashion. What
Yes.
advice do you have for emerging designers?
I would advise any new designer to go for a breakthrough. I do believe what Christian Lacroix said is so true, that momentous things in fashion happen after catastrophes. And we're living through catastrophes. So I kind of favor two maybe lunar looks. I think the fact that 2 of our billionaires have sent planes that they own into space, I think that's revolutionary. And my advice is go for it. Don't get stuck in the past. I mean, appreciate the past, but don't feel you have to repeat it.
Great. Marianne Vaccaro, do you have some questions?
I know, I thought that was great advice. And that was one of the first things
Yeah.
I would have asked too. I love that you gave us hope with that quote, because as I look at everything now and wherever I go, I don't see people who care about how they're dressing. You do have to give them something to want new clothes. My first thing that I tell everyone who's getting into design is how important it is to learn all the parts that make your design come together, to know how to sew and sew well, to understand tailoring, to understand fabric, to not have to depend on your pattern maker. In the variety of companies that I have worked for, you do the design sketch, you turn it over to the pattern maker, and the pattern maker might give you what you designed. But when you are involved in the pattern making yourself, you find little places that make changes that make the garment more than you ever wanted it to be. So I stress that kind of importance. And then most important thing of all is quality, quality, quality. You have to think about who your audience is going to be and design for that audience that you want. I mean, I shouldn't say audience, I should say customer. How do you feel about that, Marylou?
I just think that was brilliant. You said all the things I should have and left out. No, your advice is so good. Get your hands on it and try to decide. Well, you have to decide, who are you designing for? Who is your customer?
Right. Now, Marylou, I love the way you talked about the shows and everything. But it's like, what people don't understand is that all goes into the cost of your clothes. And yet you cannot have those clothes without being the celebrity to people, because being the celebrity is what validates to them what it is that you do, being worth what they're going to pay for it, right?
Yes, I think Halston's quote confirms that. You're only as good as the people you dress.
Right. And I mentioned to you earlier how I had just read Grace Mirabella. She had been editor-in-chief at Vogue magazine prior to Anna Wintour. And
Yes.
She tells a long story about Halston. My piece of advice to everyone is keep away from the drugs and the wild crowd, because little by little, his demise comes by his associates and by who ill advises him and all those kinds of things, because he's not paying attention anymore because he's off on a trip, so keep away. And your interview that you did with Norma Kamali, I don't know, you might want to talk about Norma Kamali, Marylou, because of all the things that she brought into the world of fashion in her time. But Norma and Eddie Kamali were married and they worked together, but she had to leave him when he got into drugs. It's like the high cannot be as anywhere near the low that it will bring you to.
Well,
Yeah.
To me, Norma Kamali deserves credit. If there is one fashion design on the streets, especially of America and Europe, it's the puffer. Well, she designed it, the first one. It was her sleeping bag. She had no money, and she had an apartment but no bed, and she slept on the floor in a sleeping bag. And that encouraged her to use that bag. She converted it into a coat, and she makes millions of variations of it right now. Okay, so she invented the puffer. She also, I give her so much credit for making the show again interesting. She would have some of her shows on the street. The models would be walking up, she's at 56th and 5th, and they would be walking up Fifth Avenue. That's the way you saw her clothes. She
Wow.
also, there's another big thing I owe to her.
Is it the sweats?
Yes,
That's it.
exactly. She brought the sweatshirt from the gym to the runway, and absolutely was the first to do that. Anyway, and she continues with her first. She was the first to have her own online to show her collection. She had her own online, what do you call it when you
Website.
have a site?
Yeah. Right.
Okay. She was the very first to do that. She just is an amazing person to this very minute. Now, one of her major things is her wellness commitment. She has a little restaurant in her boutique, and she makes only the most amazing foods that are good for you. And she swears that she could cure this and that if you just stop eating that and start eating this. Anyway, she's amazing.
You know, Marylou, I didn't hear you mention anything about Anne Klein. I mean, in your talk, but I know you, okay. Anne Klein and Donna Karen.
I
And
know, isn't that terrible? There are so many I left out. They're all in my book
Sure.
of quotations, but okay.
Oh, hey,
But
Mary
wait,
Lou.
I'm asking what you remember about them that you would like to share with us at this moment. That's all.
Okay. Donna Karen, again, was a real first. I was once at well, to me, she made, what did she call them? She called it the buy now, wear now theory. That was her idea, and it's a good one. Instead of waiting, 3 or 4 months after you've shown a collection to deliver it, show it the day before you're going to deliver. I still think that's a good idea. If you want, show it to the buyers early, but show it in your showroom. Don't have a show. If you're going to do a big show, I think save it for when those clothes reach the store.
Hey, Mary Lou,
Mhm.
we have a question
Let
from,
me finish. I'll just finish this. Probably Anne Klein's biggest thing she ever did was hire Donna Karen. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We just had a question from Omaha South High School, and they've got to hop off in about 5 minutes to go to their next class. But there's a class of 45 first-year fashion students tuning into this call. They want to know if you have any advice for them. So these are like 14 and 15-year-olds who are just getting started learning about fashion. Any advice?
Okay. If you admire your teacher, I would, now this, you're going to think I'm crazy. I would dress kind of like your teacher. That's assuming you're a boy and the teacher is a man, or you're a girl and the teacher is a woman. I think you'd be very lucky to be a great intern for a great designer. And for them, if you get that opportunity, take it. And that's where you will first learn, I think, beyond school. It's crucial. Like Anne Klein, she indeed did host other designers who worked for her. And that to me was such an amazing, nice thing for her to do. And she gave them credit.
I'm sorry. what I wanted to share about that story is, if anyone can watch on YouTube or anything, there's a video that's called Shmata, Schmatta, which is the Jewish word for rags. And it's the
Yes.
story of the development and the demise of the garment industry. And it's really interesting to pay close attention to that and how everything was built and what it was about. But the thing about Anne Klein is Anne Klein and Bonnie Cash and Claire McCardle, they really brought American sportswear to the level that it permeated our American, style of dressing. And when from my understanding was, that Anne Klein hired Donna Karan as her fit model. And then when she got lung cancer and died and she wanted Donna Karan to do it, Donna Karan said, I cannot do it without my friend Louis Dell'Olio.
Yeah.
Remember Louis?
Very
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, right. Because he was the one who had the tailoring expertise. And that's where those beautiful jackets of the mid-'80s, remember her beautiful cashmere jackets and the hats and the black and the bodysuits and all those kinds of things came from, for a new understanding of the American woman. I thought it was, very cool.
To me, Anne Klein was not a great designer, but she was a great helper, an explainer and translator. I was crazy about her first husband. Well, maybe her only husband. When I worked for the Chicago Tribune, my boss, Miss Nangle, said, that's insane that people are going to sit at the Pierre Hotel to look at the collections that designers did way before, and that they're only looking at Eleanor Lambert's clients. Anyway, she made the point that we were crazy to go and watch fashion that way. She said, what would a sports writer, he wouldn't go to see the World Series and not write about it for 3 months. This is crazy. We have to go to see the clothes when the buyers see the clothes. And that was an amazing feat. And it caused major eruptions within the fashion industry.
Well, in Grace Mirabella's book, she talks about, because she comes from the 50s up through, the same time that you're talking about. And she says, I remember when going to the shows was about sitting with, a few dozen people. But what really happened is fashion changed a lot when it was pop culture that became the customer. And when it was important to fill the room with more and more people. Whether or not they're your customer, out of the hundreds or whatever number of people that are there for you, there aren't that many who will understand what your fashion message is and be the people who buy your clothes, right?
That's why it's important to be a good fashion journalist.
Important. Yes.
When I was in college, the going thing was your every lead you did had to say who, what, why, when, and where, and sometimes how many or how much. And we lived by that. Today, I'm a great fan, I've always been, of the New York Times, but I'm amazed there isn't one story in the New York Times that has who, what, why, when, and where. You get about 3 paragraphs of why we're writing this story, and then you get, this is the story. But they set the pace and they set the scene for, it's almost like in fashion with the show. The show is so important now, even with the internet and all of the free, the show is still important. It's inspirational, I think.
I see a lot of questions in the chat.
Yeah, I do too. And I have to say, Marylou, I'm so pleased to hear you say that the show is still important. That's really great. And I think that gives a lot of hope to all of our designers out there who are trying to do the original shows.
Because you can film it, and then show it over and over and over again. But
Exactly.
it's great to have that as your core, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Experience is really important. Okay, so we have a question from Sammy Hartong. How do you have a personal favorite designer from over the years in terms of personality or style? Who do you
Yes,
love
I
the most?
several. Well, currently I would say it's Rick Owens. Um, Charles Gallet was a famous Beverly Hills retailer when I worked for the LA Times. And then when I left, we kept in touch, and he knows that I always stayed at the same hotel in Paris. He called me and he said, there's a young designer here in Los Angeles. I think it's very talented. And I've told him he has to stay at your hotel and that you will come and look at his clothes. And if you think he deserves that, you will help him. So indeed, he did stay at my hotel, and I made an appointment to come to his suite. And I did, and I walked in, he had draped the entire suite in black fabric. And as you may or may not know, he became famous as the father of goth, black. I was so impressed with what he did. His clothes are breakthrough clothes. And I guess maybe because I'm a journalist, I'm always looking for the news. I don't care if it's well done past tense. I mean, yeah, I realize that you need that, but I'm always looking for the news. So I was at that time doing all these fashion group shows. And each season I would hire retailers and press, about 6 people, and we would meet in each major fashion city to discuss the trends. And our last meeting was always in Paris, the last day. So we wound up kind of early, and we met at my hotel, the Regina, where Rick Owens was. So I said, we have a little time. If you want to, there's someone I think is very talented here at this hotel. Would you like to go see his clothes? I'm sure he'd be thrilled. They said, yeah, sure, let's do it. Well, thanks to the retailers there and the press there, he got raves. And so he always says that I discovered him. And he always used to seat me next to his mother. And I just think of him as so amazing, so breakthrough. And then through the years, my other favorites would be Jeffrey Bean. One of my Jeffrey Bean quotes that I loved was, he and John Fairchild, who was head of Women's Wear Daily then, did not get along. And Mr. Fairchild wouldn't let anyone on his staff write about Jeffrey Bean's clothes. And when I asked him for a quote, he said, well, you know what I call John Fairchild? I call him John Unfairchild. I love that. Anyway, so there's Jeffrey Bean and Rudy Gernreich. I just think a giant. And he was right. Until the 60s, clothes were clothes. And then everything changed. And he certainly helped change everything. And he was also a very nice guy. He was a dancer, the Alvin Ailey ballet. And anyway, those would be my favorites.
Your favorites. Okay, great. Thank you. And then we have another question from Edelweiss. What do you think of designers and fashion shows now, especially things like red carpet fashion, the Met Gala? What's your reaction to that versus what you've seen historically?
I think we've come to the point where in order to get mentioned by people on social media, you do need to have celebrities wearing your clothes. So many designers today pay celebrities to wear their clothes because they know how mentioning them is important to movie fans or dancers or anyway, the celebrity quotient right now, I think it's very important.
Mm-hmm.
And
Great.
also it's important in assimilation. As you may or may not have noticed, there are many more Black models being shown, used on the runways today, many more. And same in magazines. You'll notice many, many more Black models and stories about Black people. And so in that way, I think fashion is helping assimilate.
Yes,
I have a
representing,
question.
absolutely.
I have a question again. I need to hear a little bit more about Rick Owens from you, because I see all of the mention that
Or about what?
I want to know a little bit more about Rick Owens' clothes, because I'm very, very familiar with them, you know, seeing him in person, Bergdorf, seeing him constantly in Women's Wear Daily. But we live in a time where comfort is luxury, and movement, motion, speed, all of those things are about what our clothes need to be about.
Wait.
Clothes-
Can I tell you, I don't think it's all about comfort. But I'll go back to that. You think-
Okay. But how wearable are his clothes? When I see those 5-inch platform shoes, who buys them? Do you see people in them?
Who are you talking about? What
Rick
design?
Owens.
Oh yeah, he has a very good store in I don't know how many stores, but somebody once told me that his one black leather jacket is enough
Right.
to keep him going for years.
Right.
Oh, yeah, his clothes are widely worn, and for every maybe crazy thing he shows on the runway, he does uncrazy things in the showroom.
Oh, okay. There are some things then that are not as exaggerated as what I see.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand. I just read about an artist too, who said the only thing she needs is her one Rick Owens jacket, and then everything else that goes under it doesn't have to make a difference. So I'm like, which jacket is it?
It's
You know what I'm
probably
saying,
not-
from what I'm seeing. Right.
Now, can I take up what you said about comfort?
Oh, sure.
Okay, of course there is a comfort quotient, but I think in current shows, there's just as much craziness and as much corsetry. So it's both. We live at a time where anything goes. I mean, anything. Bare breasts even again. You're seeing breasts again. Some of these skirts are so short, even by very famous designers. I wonder, will buyers really buy them that short? I don't know, but anything goes, anything. Corsets, lots of glitz and jewels, and just the more outlandishly look at me, you can be that's what a lot of designers aim for. Not all, but a lot.
So it's almost an escape from the humdrum of pandemic life.
Yes, absolutely
So
right.
fashion is an escape. Yeah. So we have a question from Alicia. What are your thoughts on having extended sizes shown in fashion weeks? For example, Christian Siriano.
Of having them do what?
Extended sizes. So like sizes beyond like a size 2-4, going up to like an 18 or 20. Yeah, extended size.
One of my great fashion friends is an expert on that. You should ask her to speak. Her name is Pam Shanehouse. She's from Toronto. And she had a daughter that died suddenly, and she herself is disabled. And she has made it her life to get people to extend their size range and to help. And one of my sons is head of the biggest disabled organization, and he has helped her. And she's very smart, and she would be so good for you to invite to the show.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to her. So after the call today, I'd love her contact details. That would be great.
Okay, I will send you her email.
Yeah.
Okay, she's
Great.
great
So
and very smart.
awesome. Fantastic. I can't wait to talk to her. So do you have any thoughts then? Like, I mean, back in the, 80s and the 70s, it seemed like, and even, well, maybe the 70s and 80s models were so, so thin. And then you got into the 90s and they became more voluptuous. You had the Cindy Crawfords and the supermodels out there. And now we're seeing different sizes represented on the runway.
And
What
different
do you,
sexes. Different
yes, yeah,
sexes.
so much. Absolutely. So what do you think about that? Do you
I
think that's been good for fashion? Has it been, what's your reaction?
I think fashion always reflects its time. And as long as fashion keeps doing the moment plus the future, I think it has a place. I just think, again, that anything goes. As more and more designers include, as more and more designers who were primarily women's wear designers, as more and more show men's too, and some children's, I think that that's great. It makes it a little more difficult to write about, unless you're writing only about menswear or only about women's wear. But it's what we are today.
Mhm. There's no more pigeonholing people into one category. You can be a lot of things.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Or if you want to be pigeonholed, you can be pigeonholed. And that's the inclusive nature of this moment.
Mhm. Marianne, do you have any other questions?
No, not really. The one thing I just say about comfort is, it's carried to an extreme in our time right now. And my quote that I have lived by as far as everything goes is the comfort zone is the danger zone. If you're too comfortable, you'll gain weight, you won't take care of yourself. It's like starts a dumbing down thing. If you're too comfortable in your life, you won't take a risk. So the comfort zone is not a good place to be. So the comfort I was really referring to is just your ability to be comfortable with yourself and,
Oh, okay.
motion, your
I-
motion of what you do, and all of those things, all about, for who you are. But, there's a big stretch to the definition.
I'm sorry, I took it literally. And
Oh, it's okay. No. I completely
I
understand because
apologize.
that's where we are now,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so I hope we turn away from that extreme. You go to the grocery store and it's like, I can't wait to get out of there because of what I see. It depresses me for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to mention another thing though. I have to say, I grew up overweight. I had all of this stuff about, like I was so self-conscious, but I really care about making large people more beautiful and making them feel comfortable with themselves.
That's why you have to meet Pam.
I
have to pay her.
believe in putting large people on the runway. But what I also understand as a pattern maker and someone who has done custom for like 40 years, I have 40,000 original patterns because every person's body is different, is that as the body grows, it doesn't grow the same way. So as far as the industry and the pattern making and the grading, upscaling goes, some women, when they start to gain weight, gain in their stomach. Others gain in their hips. Some have it in their thighs. Some have large arms. There's no generality that you can take a pattern up to when the design is restrictive to a number of things. You know what I mean, Marylou?
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's it. So,
Great.
it's just, there will be certain clothes that for you and others that they can't put on you.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, I think it's that is
But there used to be so many rules and there aren't now. Like you couldn't wear white after Labor Day.
Oh, right.
Remember that?
I do, definitely. I do.
And rules about how a large woman could never wear a sweater. a revealing sweater. Large women should never wear horizontal stripes. I have a great, if you're a large woman, I have a great way if you want to disguise your weight, and it came from a friend. This woman is probably, she could be a size 18. You'd never know it because everything she wears, she has long scarves covering most of her body. And it's those long scarves that make her, she doesn't look big. It's amazing. My other son was on a diet, and I told him what he could do with the scarves, and he did it. And every time he would wear those scarves, I didn't notice that he had gained weight. And now he's lost 60 pounds.
Oh, my word.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh,
Amazing.
Mary Lou, were you ever familiar with the store, The Forgotten Woman?
Yes,
Her
sure.
name was Radman. What was her first name? See, I did close for her
Say
too.
that name again?
Nancy Radman was her name.
No, I didn't know the
Oh,
name.
but you remember the Forgotten Woman up on 60-something street on the east side?
Oh, yes, I know the store.
Oh, yeah. You know, she did go out of business though. Because she couldn't keep enough designers providing her with the inventory for her store.
Yes, and in fact, I think Isabel Toledo did a collection for her.
Okay.
I love it when no, I shouldn't use the word important. I love it when creative designers will do something like Halston did for J.C. Penney. In those days, that was not good for him, but helping people. I think more and more, I love the idea of, what are they calling it? Working with somebody else, another artist, another designer. What's that called?
Collaborating?
Yes, I love that idea. I think it's very smart, and it makes everything more interesting.
Agreed. All
Makes
right.
you open your
Are there any
eyes.
further? Let's see. Somebody wrote, I work for a boutique and we cater to women of all sizes, but often it's hard to find flattering garments that span 0 to 3X. So somebody out there is just affirming there are challenges to dressing different body types, but the idea of collaboration and working together to help others is important, and it's an important role that fashion can play in our world.
Yes, it is. You could have a whole day of Fashion Week on this subject, but I just so highly encourage you to talk to or get to know Pam.
We will do that. Absolutely. Well, we are about 20 minutes over time. This has been so fascinating to talk with you, Marylou. No, it's been such a great conversation. We're just so thankful that you've taken the time today to be with us. Do you have any parting words of advice?
Yes, I want you to buy my book when it comes out.
Hey, yes. Okay, so what is the name of it and when is it coming out?
It's called They Said What? And it's designer quotes that I have saved through the years, each quote illustrated by Ruben Toledo's amazing illustrations. And it will be a coffee table book. And the publisher is Rizzoli, and it's due out in September. But I kind of have my doubts. I just spoke with Ruben. He's had some setbacks, and he's behind on delivering all of the illustration. But the book doesn't have a time element, really. It's just through the years with designer quotes that I thought were most memorable.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. Well, we'll be looking out for that in the fourth quarter of this year for sure. And we'll be sure to share it with all of our followers when it comes out, because that's very exciting. Great. Well, thank you to Marianne Vaccaro for being here and asking some of those great questions. And Marylou Luther, you've just been such a joy and such a wealth of knowledge. Thank you for sharing with us.
Well, I had a great time. Thank you for putting up with my, I know I was lengthy and it's hard to stop me once I get started. Anyway, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. It was a joy to listen to. Cheers. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Cheers.
Stay